Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of the hour. Israel presses its assault on Gaza City, destroying tunnels and booby-trapped sites, with Gaza officials reporting 34 Palestinians killed. The attacks come as 10 countries, including the UK and Canada, prepare to recognise a Palestinian state. Estonia accuses Russia of an unprecedentedly brazen airspace violation after 3 military jets entered for 12 minutes. Moscow denies the incursion as NATO monitors rising provocations. A cyber attack on check-in and boarding systems strands passengers at Heathrow, Berlin and Brussels airports. Collins Aerospace confirms a cyber-related disruption with flight delays and cancellations across Europe. India's top tech trade body NASSCOM warns that the new $100,000 1HB visa fee announced by President Trump is a major concern. It says the one-day deadline creates global uncertainty and urges a gradual rollout to minimize disruption for businesses. A Ukrainian drone strike kills 4 in Russia's Samara region. Local officials confirm the attack comes as President Volodymyr Zelensky announces he will meet Donald Trump at the UN next week to discuss security guarantees and sanctions on Moscow. Taiwan's Lai Ching-te declares the island will defend itself against any invasion and urges the world to ignore false claims of surrender. He says only Taiwan's people can decide their future amid growing Chinese pressure. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian vows Tehran will overcome any new sanctions after the UN Security Council votes to reimpose them under the snapback process. He says Iran will rebuild its nuclear sites and never surrender to Western pressure. Hamas releases a new farewell picture of 48 Israeli captives as Israel's ground invasion and airstrikes intensify in Gaza City. The image, posted by the Qassam Brigades, shows faces of all hostages labelled Ron Arad, invoking an Israeli pilot missing since 1986. Now we start this hour in the United States, where Jimmy Kimmel Live has been suspended following his comments on conservative figure Charlie Kirk, who was assassinated in broad daylight at Utah Valley University in front of thousands of people. Earlier today, there were reports of the studio in Los Angeles wrapping up. Meanwhile, Kimmel and Disney are in talks to strike a compromise to bring the show back, but the controversy runs deeper, as reports suggest that the suspension is also linked to a $6.2 billion merger between Nexstar and Tegna, under intense FCC scrutiny and political pressure from Chairman Brendan Carr. If approved, the merger would create one of the largest local networks in US history, controlling 265 stations in 44 US states and reaching 80% of households, so far exceeding the FCC's 39% ownership cap. Meanwhile, Disney, which owns ABC and produces Jimmy Kimmel Live, is also under pressure as it negotiates an ESPN deal with the NFL. Earlier, ABC News had to pay Donald Trump $15 million towards his presidential library to settle a defamation case over comments made by anchor George Stefano. We're now joined by Mark Sutherland, and he's a geopolitical commentator, and he joins us live from London to discuss this ongoing situation in the United States a little bit deeper. Mark, thank you very much for joining us. This debate now has been going on for the last few days, ever since the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Free speech has been at the centre of this entire situation. This is a bipartisan issue. Free speech is claimed to have being attacked on both sides. What are your thoughts on Jimmy Kimmel being taken off the air for these comments, first of all?
Well, as Thomas, good to be with you. As you made very clear, there are more mergers that are going on in the background. The American broadcasting scene, is fascinating. If we go back a number of years, we would then look at Bill Clinton freeing up the regulations in regard to how many radio stations a company could actually own. There was always a concern when it appears that more and more conglomerates are then buying up more and more of the broadcasting outlets, and then the concern is, they will then be pushing a particular agenda. A number of years ago, without sounding like Mr. Conspiracy Theorist, because it's out there was an incredible sort of video on YouTube where it showed many TV stations in America appearing, frankly, to say exactly the same. Now, the other thing that you can say without being cynical, because we have seen it in regard to on the Democrat side, is that they would then start crying wolf now, because frankly, they have been pushing this constant propaganda, one could argue, through the broadcast networks in America for many years. And that's why in America there's a huge uptake in independent media and people doing podcasts and all the rest. Mr. Kimmel, personally, if you ask my personal opinion, should have just stopped at saying where he offered condolences to understandably to Erica Kirk and her children and extended family, and should have stayed there. After this appalling incident of Charlie Kirk being assassinated, there are many people that should have just stood back and basically kept extremely quiet. We've seen appalling things where young people, including an individual right in front of Charlie's tent, standing up, and it seemed to be celebrating the fact that he had just been assassinated. And my concern, like many, is that young people cannot distinguish between real life and a video game. This is a real life. This is not the first time. If we go back to the whole Portland riots with Antifa, with I think Andrew Nijo, I think the reporter and the man that would do a lot of undercover reporting on Antifa, when he was attacked. There are others. Words are important, how we conduct and how we debate. And also within the American society, people have started voting with their finger. They've been getting rid of, stop watching certain programs, stop watching certain output, because they don't agree with things that are said. Now, of course, the late night Saturday shows, whether that was Colbert, etc., would always be pushing the button. They would always be pushing pushing those boundaries. But people start to vote with the feet, and viewers, I think, are also expressing an opinion. Mr. Carr is noting that. Other CEOs of companies, Disney, have been in a lot of trouble, especially with their remake of Snow White, where they lost so much money because they turned it into a woke fest. There's a lot to discuss here, Thomas. There's lots of layers that are coming in, Thomas.
Yes, and Mark, let's talk about FCC Chairman Brendan Carr a little bit more. What role does his scrutiny play in shaping the outcome of this? Could political considerations influence the regulatory decisions here?
Thomas, I think your question is extremely fair. I think my own understanding of Mr. Carr is that he used to be, I think, a newscaster anchor. He has been around media for many years, quietly, maybe you could argue in the background. What you say is a fair question, but this is what it always comes down to, doesn't it? In any country's media, where, and there's a lot I could say about our own public broadcasting here in the UK, is that would be the accusation that would be made. And here is the challenge. Here is, of course, the FCC's challenged, Carr's challenged. which is to then be balanced. But I think also, to be fair, in this heightened atmosphere within America after the appalling assassination of Charlie Kirk, it just proved that some people have not learnt the art of basically offering a condolence and stepping back and keeping their mouth shut for a long period of time. It also reveals within America that many people who are not of a left-wing persuasion have also had enough of what's been pushed out there through the media. It also has to be noted that it's very interesting that a number of people who would have classed themselves as Democrats have then seen certain behavior of certain individuals by expressing, sadly, awfully, sort of delight in the fact that Charlie Kirk has been assassinated. They have then started to really think through some of their own political thinking and actually walking away from the Democratic Party. The whole thing of politics within the media, as we know, goes back many years. But you are right, as in this will be the accusation against Carr. This is the walk that he has to walk. But also within the capitalist system, Disney has to look at its viewers, has to look at its bottom line like other companies. And there is this deal, as I think with reference to, with Nexstar and Tegnar, if I've got the pronunciation right, that are going on. At the end of the day, it will come down to the customer that is then pushing and will influence decisions of these companies, Thomas.
Yeah. Okay, Mark, do stay with us. We have news next from Europe, where according to Ukraine's SBU security officials, Ukrainian drones have targeted multiple oil pumping stations linked to Russian oil exports via the Black Sea port of the Novorossiysk. The attacks struck pumping stations along the Berezhkiev-Tikhorskoye oil pipeline in Russia's Volgograd and Samara regions. Authorities said efforts to disrupt Russia's oil revenues and cash flows will continue. This comes as Ukraine intensifies strikes on Russian energy infrastructure, worsening fuel shortages across the country. This year, Ukraine has been focusing on choking supplies to the Russian economy and military, aiming to hit Russia's energy export revenues. We are once again joined by Mark Sutherland to discuss this further. Mark, how have you assessed Ukraine's efforts to strike and disrupt Russia's energy infrastructure, its cash flow that is funding its war machine in the majority? What are your thoughts on Kyiv's ability here?
As other people have commented, where Ukraine is really, it seems to be using their drone technology access and ability of that military hardware extremely well. You and I have discussed this. You've just read this out, which is that how does Russia fund its war effort? And it has been funding that through the oil, gas revenue that it will then gain by selling that. That is how this is funded. And Ukraine then, of turning, as it looks in this action, have attacked the pumping stations. Then, if you are attacking that, you are then affecting, of course, I'm saying the obvious, the Russian economy. You are affecting the Russians the Russian people living within Russia. If Putin, to President Trump and others, will not come to the table, then the way to then Ukraine, understandably, is turning around and going, if you won't come to the table, then we have to work out how we can bring your economy to its knees. And in my humble opinion, that is what they are then doing, and they are working to then do, Thomas.
Yes, Mark, thank you very much. Do stay with us. You are discussing further updates. We do stay in Europe next and move to a related development where NATO has released new footage showing French Rafale fighter jets patrolling Polish skies under the alliance's ongoing Eastern Sentry mission. The operation was launched to strengthen defences along Europe's eastern flank in direct response to Russian drone incursions into Polish airspace. On Saturday, both Polish and Allied aircraft were deployed following Russian airstrikes that struck near the Polish border, raising fresh security concerns in the region. The Polish military confirmed the joint response aimed at safeguarding national airspace. Meanwhile, Estonia has accused Russia of brazen airspace violations, claiming that 3 Russian military jets entered NATO airspace for 12 minutes, an incident that the Estonian government has called unprecedented. NATO confirmed participation in Eastern Sentry includes 2 F-16S and a Danish frigate, 3 French Rafales, and 4 German Eurofighters, forming a multinational air defence effort across Eastern Europe. Let's listen in to what the French Air Force pilot, Major Victor, had to say.
Quick reaction alert. It means that we are ready 24/7 to take off on demand. The demand comes from the chain of command of the NATO, and we are able, when necessary, to take off and be ready for any mission.
Okay, we're now joined by Dr. Satoru Nagao. He is a fellow at the Hudson Institute, and he joins us live from Tokyo, Japan, to discuss the ongoing situation in Eastern Europe a little further. Dr. Nagao, thank you very much for joining us. Of course, Operation Eastern Sentry was launched after Russian drones entered Polish airspace 19 times in a single evening. Another instance followed after that and into Romanian airspace, and we have of course seen today where jets entered Estonian airspace. Dr. Nagao, how significant is NATO's Eastern Sentry mission in terms of deterring further Russian incursions like the ones I've just mentioned?
Russia is intensifying the provocation against NATO because Russia does not afraid NATO. So Russia says NATO expanding, NATO is threat, and this is a reason to invade Ukraine, and something like that. But the reality is Russia the NATO will not attack Russia, and that's why Russia is intensifying the provocation against NATO as a stress test. So making pressure to NATO, you cannot do anything, something like that. So as a response, NATO tried to strengthen defense line by deploying the fighter jet, naval ship. So that is currently they are responding against Russia's provocation. But at the same time, if Russia continue to provoke NATO need to think something more stronger reaction to the Russia. And if the NATO can do such kind of the retaliation style provocation, in this case, it is a good message to deter Russia's aggression, I believe, but at the same time, can NATO do that or not is the matter just now. So currently, NATO's reaction is quite defensive, I think, because deploying the fighter jet, naval ship, this is defensive action and try to avoid the escalation. So this is responsible action, I think.
Dr. Nagao, this was obviously a provocation from Moscow, all 3 times that this has occurred. How do you think that Moscow has sat there and analysed NATO's response to this?
I think Russia does not think that something retaliation has happened from NATO side. For example, the 90 times the drone enter. So NATO side can send the drone to enter the Russia's territory air 90 times is possible. But at the same time, it hasn't happened because the responsible country should not do such kind of things that NATO think just now. But that is the reason Russia do not afraid to intensify their provocations. Romania and Estonia, one by one, they are stepping up. So view from Russia, NATO's stance is very weak. If the Russia is NATO, they can do that. But current NATO cannot do that, Russia think. That's why Russia do not afraid to escalate the provocation, I think.
Yes, Dr. Nagao, thank you very much for joining us. Please stay with us, but we do move on and over to our next story, where an elderly British couple, Peter and Barbie Reynolds, have been reunited with their daughter after enduring a 7-month detention under the Taliban regime. The couple, both Afghan citizens, were held in Afghanistan after being arrested by the Taliban in February. Following high-level negotiations between the UK and the Taliban, mediated by Qatar, the couple was released and flown to Doha, where emotional reunions took place. Their daughter, Sarah Entwistle, expressed deep gratitude to the governments of Qatar and the United Kingdom for their support, emphasising the power of diplomacy and international cooperation. While the Taliban has not disclosed the charges against the couple, they were released after judicial proceedings. The Qatari government has reaffirmed its commitment to mediation and peaceful conflict resolution. Okay, we are now joined by Mark Sutherland to discuss this further. Mark, Qatar seems to be mediating quite frequently in conflicts. It seems to be a good meeting place. What role did Qatar play in mediating between the UK and the Taliban, and why has Doha become such a trusted intermediary in these situations?
Open to a lot of interpretation. We'll come back to that in a minute. And as you quite rightly pointed out, so this couple were Afghani citizens since 1970. I believe they've been doing education projects out there. And as you rightly say, we don't fully know the charges that were laid against them. Without this, it sounds very good PR for Qatar, especially as this point where we've got this recognizing, as they would say, recognizing a two-state solution, recognizing Palestine in the UN at the moment. So it all adds up to me, in my opinion, where they are deemed to try and look at this great sort of diplomatic country, even though in that case, and this is the caveat that we have to give, even though it's against a different subject, but you allude to this where there suddenly seem to be diplomacy personified, is that they have had the leaders of Hamas and living in Qatar since the 7th of October 2023, when they have also, inverted commas, perceived to be negotiating to then release the Israeli hostages. So you can then ask that could then accuse that there are double standards. In this case, of course, it's then reported, if we look at places like Al Jazeera, who are then financed by Qatar, that that was a Freudian slip. Prime Minister Starmer of the UK is then grateful for the Qatar and their diplomacy in regard to getting this couple released. The big story is, the big sort of advice that I would give, Thomas, is that we need to constantly look under the hood, the bonnet of the car, to find out what's really going on. And in regard to Qatar, we then have to look at their actions, as I said, where you are then housing terrorist leaders of Hamas and at the same time being seen to then work hard to release the hostages that were taken on the 7th of October in just appalling outrages and what happened on that day, Thomas.
Okay, Mark, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. Always a pleasure to talk to you. We now move on over to Europe, where a cyber attack on Collins Aerospace, provider of check-in and boarding systems, has disrupted operations at several major European airports earlier today, including London's Heathrow, the continent's busiest, causing flight delays and cancellations. The company's parent, RTX, said that the issue involves a cyber-related disruption to its misuse software at its select airports. It further added that the impact is limited to electronic customer check-in and baggage drop and can be mitigated with manual check-in operations. At Heathrow, Berlin and Brussels, 29 departures and arrivals have been cancelled so far. Dublin Airport 2 temporarily evacuated Terminal 2 as a precaution, with resumed flights soon after, but warned of possible minor disruptions throughout the day. Moreover, US carriers Delta and United Airlines said they expected minimal impact, with US Delta implementing workarounds and United Airlines reporting only minor departure delays without any cancellations. We are now joined by Dr. Satoru Nagao. He is a fellow at the Hudson Institute. Dr. Nagao, what are your thoughts on this? Of course, major delays across Europe. What was the likely reason for the cyber attack here, and why do they happen?
Yeah, this is very important. Motivation of the perpetrator is matter. And because regularly the United Airlines are the target of by the cyber attack, so that's why there is a possibility this could be the one of the attack but succeeded. But at the same time, if this is Russia's provocation, in this case, we should think that this attack as a part of the chain of the provocation recently against Poland, Romania, or Estonia. So that's why this is completely different strategic thinking is needed to reply to this attack. If this is a nation-based attack and the provocation, of course, retaliation could be the one option to punish. So that's why just a crime or the nation-based cyber attack, even if the same situation, this situation could be the two scenario after that. So who commit this? And what is the motivation is a very important matter. But in case of cyber attack, indeed, it is not easy to identify.
Yes, Dr. Satoru Nagao, thank you very much for joining us. It's always a pleasure. Well, that is all that we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world.